Hi, guys. Welcome to Steph's podcast. This is episode 58. And today we are talking ADUs and landscape with my really good friend today, Michael Bernier. And I usually give an introduction, but I think he's so talented and wears many different hats that I think you should just tell the people who you are, what you do, and then we'll start talking about, what is this whole ADU landscape conversation about.
Okay, great. I'm very excited to be here and welcome everyone who's watching and listening. I am Michael Bernier, and I have a landscape and exterior design business in Los Angeles, but I work all over California and even the United States doing projects. And I currently I'm merging my business, partnering with Homeplex, as you can see here in the background. I am working with Homeplex as their design director to help them create very beautiful and livable landscapes and exterior spaces around the structure, which we're going to dive into more.
Mm-hmm.
But my background is that I have my own landscape design business for the past 12 years or so. I've been doing it for about 15 years. And, but prior to that, I used to be in advertising and marketing. I was a creative director and did that for many years. And while the work was very creative, it was kind of soulless. It didn't fulfill like why I wanted to be creative. I was working for some of the biggest companies in the world and just felt like it wasn't a good alignment with, with why I create things. So about 15 years ago, I made the switch or began the process of making the switch. I had what I call my Jerry Maguire moment where I was like, I can't do this anymore. I was doing an ad campaign for this very large high fructose corn syrup producing company. And I just said, I just can't do this anymore. And I discovered landscape architecture, went back to school at UCLA, and just said, this is going to be my passion. And I started my business, like I said, about 2011, I think, and it just took off. And it's very fulfilling. I love working with nature. And most importantly, it's not just nature, it's how humans interact with their outdoor space, to put it kind of simply. And that is a good lead in for why I'm working with Homeplex and their ADUs is because, and I know we're going to dive really deep into this, is, ADUs are really cool. I consider them to be a sustainable aspect of modern society. I mean, we do have a housing crisis. That's honestly not why I got into it. Well, and again, we'll talk more about that. But I want people to get outside, and we're very fortunate here in California, like you are in Florida,
Mm-hmm.
where we spend half our lives outside. And so I came to Homeplex saying, look, your outdoor spaces are just as important as the structure, like you see right there. This is one of the projects I did for a mid-century modern home here in Los Angeles, and so that's why I do what I do, because I want people to get outside, and I think it's really important to the outdoor space. I think is just as important as the indoor space on an ADU or any structure for that matter. But especially
Yeah, and I think you and I have talked about this offline. There's really no conversation at all throughout your ADU project, and I'm sure now that you work with Homeplex, you're starting to realize, like, I know you're sort of newer into the ADU world, right? Uh, and tell people how you actually got started in ADUs, because I think that would be cool too, to share the relationship aspect and how pretty much Ari brought you along.
yeah, it's interesting how life works. That's why it's important to just go with the flow and say yes. It's been about 7 years now. Yeah, 7 years ago, I met a guy who was building. He was really big into shipping container homes
Hmm.
and was working on a project. And him and I connected, and I loved what he was doing. And again, this goes back to the more sustainability aspect of it. Like, you've got this existing structure that is solid enough to use to build homes with. And I got involved as an investor and among other things as a designer as well. And we started to build this house. And shortly after that, another investor partner came in, and that was Ari Gatti, who is the CEO of Homeplex.
And I've had him on the podcast as well, FYI.
Yeah. So Ari and I, we immediately hit it off and became friends. And that initial project didn't really pan out. We did get the house built, but there were other issues that we won't go into right now that it didn't pan out. But Ari and I remained friends. And I told him, whatever you do next, I want to be a part of. And he, what was interesting was he wasn't really into this sector before. He was a realtor, and I guess he still technically is. But he really fell in love with the idea of tiny homes and quick builds. And then ADUs became a thing. Remember, this was like 7 years ago. So ADUs were really just starting to get some traction. Right. And he created Homeplex. And so I reminded him, whatever it is that you start next, I want to be a part of. And he saw it as a perfect fit for me to bring my design expertise. And I started by helping him with just creating these landscape templates, which is part of the Homeplex process. We have, when I say templates, obviously every project is unique. Every property is unique, but we create a style template that says, hey, if you like this style, we have 3 main styles, which again, I'm sure we'll dive more into this, but I got involved and started to design all that stuff for him. And now I'm fully involved with the company. I'm an advisor and the design director. So
I think that's a very cool story because, as you said, in life, many times things don't work out. Certain partnerships don't come about the way you wanted it to. But those relationships that you connect with along the way, somewhere down the line, it just flourishes and it shows. Like even today, right? I was on the live on Instagram and I was talking about my gratitude for all the sponsors because I feel like I've done a lot of events in the last 4 to 5 years, and this event was a completely different dynamic. And I was getting a lot more sponsorship. So the fact that everybody just came about, I was like, oh my God, it just shows the true power of the relationships that I've been able to build. And now they're coming up, right? So I think that was a cool story for you to share how you even got tapped into the whole ADU scene. Now, the thing that we were talking about and the main topic of discussion for this episode was landscape, because Michael and I are working together a lot as ADU advisors for Homeplex. And we never really start the conversation or even have the conversation with an ADU client. I mean, now at Homeplex we are, right? And as you said, we're offering even templates to give a visual and really help guide the client on every aspect of the project. But for the most part, I mean, most ADU companies or architects or builders are really looking at the house itself or the ADU structure itself, right? How many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, what's the functionality going to look like? We focus a lot on the ADU itself. But as you mentioned, Michael, in places like Florida or California, where we're spending most of our time outdoors, whether it's a rental or whether it's for recreational purposes, we should have more conversations about what is the outside going to look like and how can we integrate both to make it flow much better and make these spaces appear and feel a lot bigger as well. So I think having more conversations around landscape and having that be a thought and something that we talk about at the beginning or some of these initial conversations is crucial, because we sort of leave that, we tend to leave that towards the end of the project. The project's completed. And then at that point, you're like, oh, well, what can we do to the landscape? And, we're going to talk about it. But in places like LA or SoCal, it would be smart as an investor to spend a little bit more money. And you're not spending, you're investing more money into the landscape. That's really going to give you some ROI down the line, because now you can really set yourself apart from other ADUs around the neighborhood, right? The fact that you've created, and you can maybe touch on this with your landscape lens, but what would be some of those components, right, that we'd have to look into when building an ADU and considering the landscape?
Well, yeah, like you said, every region of the country is going to be different in this aspect, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
climate or just the size of the lots. I lived in Atlanta for several years, and they have big lots there. Um,
Right.
I don't know what it's like in Florida. I imagine they have some lots there, but in a place like LA, where there's literally millions and millions of homes, there's not a lot of space. There's very few properties that have a lot of space. And when you think about it, if you do have enough space to put in an ADU, now if you look at the property behind me here, this was actually a pretty good sized lot. We designed the pool and we integrated. Everything was designed knowing that there was going to be this ADU in place, so it was all planned ahead of time. But when you've got a small lot, you're really disrupting the plot of land that you have, and whatever you were using the space for before, even if it was for nothing. I've seen projects where we drop it on just a dirt patch of dirt, and
Mm-hmm.
that's fine, but you're disrupting whatever was there before. And like you said, everybody's focus is on, okay, what's the square footage, how many bedrooms, what's this going to cost, what am I going to do with it, is it going to be for family members or is it going to be for a rental? Nobody stops to think, what about the space around it and the space between the house and and the ADU itself? So you really want to take a look at, like, what's going to be the best use of the space, and where, like, when I step into a project, one of my main jobs is figuring out where the ADU should go. Now, a client is probably already thinking, well, I think I have an idea where I want this to go. Well, at Homeplex, in the roadmap that we create, we actually give three options to show different locations, different sizes. We want to optimize both the financial aspect, the ROI, as well as the usability of the space. Because if you think about
Mm-hmm.
it, you're completely disrupting your backyard, and I'm assuming it's the backyard. And in fact,
Right.
even before I got involved with Homeplex, I've done several landscapes for after an ADU was put in the space, and I had to work around it. So, and it's workable. Everything is workable, of course, but it's always better to plan ahead and think about this ahead of time. And it's funny you said what you said, because even as just a landscape designer, if I had a dollar for every time I heard someone who renovated a house, well, we spent all the money on the house and we don't have anything left over for landscape. And I'm like, well, how am I supposed to help you then? So,
Right, right.
you know,
So
it,
yeah, that's a great point. I think whether you're an investor or, a homeowner that's building one in your backyard, you need a budget that landscape cost into your overall budget of the project, because as you said, we are disrupting the lot already. Now, how do you create, we talk about how a lot of the ADUs, especially in Southern California, are 400 to 600 square feet. So these aren't big ADUs that are being built. A lot of them are being rented out, whether it's long term or midterm, to travel nurses or college students, or, a single person, or millennials, or your grandparents, whoever it is that's downsizing to a 400 to 600 square foot unit. Most of the time, like the landscape or the outdoors, is just there's no thought into it. And so if you really wanted to maximize your rents, what are some of those things that they can do that maybe don't require a whole lot of expense, but really make a huge impact, would you say?
well, to your point, and this is what we take a look at, like literally step one in the roadmap, is what are you going to use it for? Because
Hmm.
that dictates everything. Um,
Right.
and you named off a few different things, whether it's for a family member or if it's for rental. This particular example here was it was for a studio. I think they were gonna you could sleep there, like they had extra space if they needed it, but it was also for like extra workspace. So
Hmm.
if you're using it for yourself or for family, it's generally going to be integrated into the backyard space. If you're going to rent it, you, aside from any strange circumstances, you are going to want to separate that space so the renter has its own private space,
Right.
which means you have to look at access. How are you going to be able to get to it? You got to create, I mean, you just have to divide it in some way, usually with a fence. And then privacy. Privacy is huge, both from the outside neighbors, and then privacy between the two spaces. All of those things are taken into account. And now this one behind me is not a good example, but if you've got a tight space and you're going to rent it out, you still want to make sure that you've created a little bit of outdoor space for the rental property, because when people are looking to rent something, and ADUs, a lot of ADUs are used for this. People, what's going to make someone want to rent an ADU rather than going to an apartment building? And having its own outdoor space, its own access, street parking, those kinds of things are all benefits that would be, that would have somebody want to live in an ADU. So as far as, like long-term ROI, the money that you put in to create an outdoor space, and it could just be a simple deck or patio, a place where you have chairs, or you can really go to town. And again, if you've got the space, you could put a covered pergola, a fire pit, water features, whatever you want to do. It obviously depends on the budget, but these are things to think about. The more that you can put into it, the more you're going to be able to get back. The more, just like when you're selling a home, the more attractive it becomes. I've done landscape projects, not even relating to ADUs, where we renovated the entire backyard, and the backyard became the star of the show. Not unlike this here. I mean, the house was pretty awesome. It was a mid-century Eichler. No, I don't think it was an Eichler. It was a mid-century modern home. But there was one in Hollywood that I did where, when the guy decided to sell it, the realty company, how they put this, you're a realtor, you make a website just for that property, right? All the photos were of the backyard.
That was the selling point.
Yeah, that was
amenity.
The first half dozen pictures you saw was of what we did to the backyard. And I thought that was really amazing, actually. And the house sold in 2 days for $200,000 more than what it was offered. I mean, it became the selling point of the property. So, when it comes
to, you truly do get what you put in. What you invest in the property, you're going to get, whether you're putting it on the market, the end buyer, right? Because even if it's not a rental, maybe you're building an ADU with the intention of selling it because you want to buy something bigger. I would definitely encourage you to invest in the landscape, because now the end buyer would definitely consider your ADU with landscape versus another one who doesn't have that. And that's most ADUs, and not even ADUs. Right now that you said, you've done a lot of houses with landscape. I've sold a lot of houses. There was a time period for the last 2 to 3 years. I don't know if you saw, like, the same kind of flips. They would flip the entire house and renovate it, but the backyard was always left like just dead. It was like a blank canvas. And I'm like, why wouldn't they spend just a couple $100 on this, so that they'd sell it for a much higher sales price and set the new comp in the area? But it's just not a topic of discussion, and most of the time people just don't have it in their in their budget, or they don't think about the long-term ROI that you can get. So you definitely have to invest. If you were to build, or if you, let's say you are considering landscape, what would be like the low maintenance type of landscape that you can probably give some of the listeners, some hacks on? I'd say, I know it's a hard question, but again, we're talking ADUs, right? So 400 to 600 square foot ADU, a small backyard.
It's not a hard question, because my entire business is based around that aspect. And again, every location in the country is going to be different. In fact, I think I was on another interview. I was talking to somebody who was in Atlanta, and Atlanta has massive, big, they love their grass. Yes. And they're not going to be giving that up anytime soon, but they also get one of the highest percentages of rainfall in the entire US. So it's not an issue. Here in Southern California, we're lucky if it rains 5 or 10 times a year. Right. And so when it comes to maintenance, the first thing I always look at is I'm using a lot more native plants. Native plants, especially here in Southern California, are not necessarily beautiful. There are some beautiful ones. That's why it's important to know which ones to use. Native plants can thrive without any irrigation at all. But when that's not an option, I usually go with Mediterranean style plants, which are much more exotic and very, very beautiful. In fact, we were talking about the templates. One of the templates we offer is a Mediterranean style garden, and all the plants have all been selected, and you can see that on the website. Here's the plants you're going to get, and I also am really big on low maintenance. I don't like lawns. I don't like mowing grass. And the thing that probably upsets me even more, like it's like I cringe when I see it, is hedge trimming. Some shrubs, especially if you use one for privacy, like let's say a ficus hedge, which are huge in Florida as well as here. When you grow them to be a tall shrub for privacy, you do need to trim that. That's fine. I get that. But when I see people planting hedges around their property and then they go in every month with a trimmer and shape it into something, it's like, if you're going to do that, pick a different plant, because it ends up looking like a bunch of Disneyland popsicle gumdrop things. Just drives me nuts. But that is my own personal opinion. But as a professional, I always lead with that, so pick the right plants, go, low maintenance, drought tolerant. Don't plant big shrubs that are going to grow really big and you have to keep trimming them. So as far as a maintenance thing, that's probably my first big point.
Yeah, those are some great key points for low maintenance. And I'm sure, if we wanted to customize and you didn't care about low maintenance, there's a whole other world, for that. But I think at that point, they'd have to consult with you and really tap into your creativity. And that's one of the things that you and I both have in common. I'm a creator. I'm not a landscape girl, but I'm learning from you. But
I know,
I am a
hang
creator.
out with me and you're going to learn. You're going to
start. I'm learning. Even like with the ranch event, right? I've learned a lot even in that sense. You shared a lot of insight and it taught me a lot. And which is why this whole conversation came about. And I was like, we need to have a podcast and we need to talk to people about this and really advocate for the landscape community, because and really like the ADU community as well, and like showing them like, hey, this is something that not a lot of people are talking about. It's really under like nobody's estimate or budget sheet. So why don't you do this and consider it in this type of market, or just in general? It's a great way for you to stand out as a landlord or as a homeowner, and you will attract better quality tenants as well. If you think about it, you're setting the tone and you're setting the expectation for the person who's going to stay and rent your ADU, and the longevity of keeping that tenant as well, right? I'm in the property management space, and we always want to make it a great experience, not only for the landlord, but for the tenant as well. Because if you set that tone for the tenant, then it just they're not going to want to leave. Whether you're increasing rents every year to offset a lot of these expenses, if you're treating them well, they have amenities. And in Southern California, things like backyard and parking are considered amenities, right? Because a lot of these smaller backyard units are definitely going to need to have some sort of open space for for couples or whoever it is that's renting these units. But you really set the tone, and how much you invest in the ADU will show with the type of tenants that you attract.
Yeah, and for those out there who are really into the numbers, even something to consider, and I kind of use this as an earmark for when I'm doing larger landscape projects. And as a realtor, you may even be able to back me up on this, because I got this information from a realtor. The amount of money that you should spend on your landscape property is usually between around 15%, 15 to 20%, depending on how big the lot is and how much amenities you want to create. But that's kind of a good rule of thumb.
Yeah, that's actually really good. I'd agree with that. Mm-hmm.
If you have $1 million home, you should be spending 150 to 200,000 on proper landscape, for the property. And for the people who are looking at ROI, the thing to keep in mind, and this is why we're having this conversation and wanting people to get in, thinking about this ahead of time. Landscaping, the biggest thing that I come up against with your average homeowner, not investors, of course, is how expensive landscape is. Most people just don't understand how expensive it is. Aren't we just throwing a few plants back there? No.
Right.
It's landscape design, exterior design is so much more than just plants. You have to think about the hardscape. You have to think about, like you said, maintenance, irrigation, lighting. There's so many components to it, and they all add up to a holistic experience. So it's, for the benefit of everyone, it's good to think about this ahead of time. How much are we going to be, spending on this? What's it worth? And and again, speaking of ROI, if usually the investment will come back like 15 to 20% when you go to sell the home. But here's the thing is, and this stuff is, there's the wow factor. If someone walks into a house, let's say they're two relatively equal houses, and one of them is going for more money, and they walk into a backyard like this, that wow factor is what's going to sell it. That's an intangible. You can't put that on a spreadsheet. But that's the thing. That's the key ingredient to landscape design and good space usage, is that wow factor. Like you said, why didn't somebody who's got this plain lot just throw some money into it? It could be just a little bit of money to make it prettier. I have a different opinion about that. I think it should be well planned and well designed. But basically, what you put into is what you'll get out of it. And you will get more when you do really good landscape design, for sure.
Yeah, and usually those types of flips, it's like the cheap contractors working with the cheap realtors that are doing the cheap work just to flip it in 2 months, versus the luxury end buyer who's really looking out for the end consumer and the end buyer, and really wanting to create that wow factor so that they can set that new comp sales price in that neighborhood, but then also the buyer's just completely satisfied with the purchase, right? And everybody's happy. So yeah, you do set new standards. And I think that's like the biggest takeaway from this episode, is that nobody's really talking about landscapes and ADUs. And if you were to do that and like start doing that with all your future projects or clients that you're talking to, you're really going to set yourself apart. You're really going to increase that ROI long term. You're really going to be able to increase the rents, which is going to help you increase the ROI or help you offset, a lot of the other expenses that you have. And overall, just, like I said, you're going to attract better quality tenants and be able to rinse and repeat the process. And understanding, I think, the process as well. People can say the same thing about ADUs, right? Like ADUs are so expensive. Aren't you just like, especially with garage conversions, right? I'm sure you hear this a lot. Like, what do you mean it's over 100,000? Like, aren't you just, the walls are already there? Like the garage is already there. What do you mean? But it's the trenching to utility connections. It's, those setbacks. It's the type of finishes that you're going to choose, the type of layout that you're going with, the plans, the city permits. I mean, there's so many components that come into the picture and that really affect that cost. It's not just the ADU build out itself, it's everything around it. Now also landscape, right? Adding that to the equation. But if you're looking at things in a very short-term vision type of way, where like, oh my God, it's going to cost me this much, versus really looking at this as a whole like investment and saying, okay, well, let me look at every aspect and see how I can increase the ROI long term and really maximize highest and best use to a whole other scale. Then at that point, you're doing yourself a much better service long term. And I think we pretty much ran through most of the questions that I had today. I think the last one, which we've been touching on, is what does Homeplex offer? And I think you've done a well job of just sharing with the people what you guys offer, which is templates, right? A vision. You're kind of doing a lot of the legwork for the client, because many times when a lot of these clients are looking to build an ADU, now all of a sudden they need to understand architectural plans. Now they also need to understand construction. They also need to understand financing. And now landscape. It's like a lot for a client to have to know coming in firsthand to build their ADU. So the fact that Homeplex guides you through that entire process and helps you think outside the box and helps you like know what it is that you're going to ask for or what you should be looking into, even on the, from a landscape lens, I think is a huge, huge value proposition.
Yes, that exactly. We at Homeplex, we've been talking specifically about landscape here, and I just have to say, speaking of maintenance, there's somebody in the backyard here making a ton of noise, which I really, really hate.
That's okay. We're almost wrapping up, so no worries.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm trying not to be frustrated. But speaking of maintenance, so we've been talking about landscape.
It could be worse. You could hear my son dropping Legos or my cat, but
I know normally my cat wants to get involved in my my online meetings and stuff, but this time she's sleeping somewhere, which is great.
Aww.
But to your point, so we are talking about a really like you said, unspoken aspect, but very important aspect of when you're looking at the whole picture. And I wanted to say something about what you mentioned. You said trenching. Here's the thing. Regardless of what you think you want to do, I don't think I've seen a ADU project that didn't require ripping something up and trenching to the street. So you're already going to be tearing up your landscape, right? You could be tearing up your
exactly.
So you've really got to be thinking about this stuff ahead of time, and that's why the Homeplex roadmap that we create, because the landscape is just one small component of that. We create. That's why we call it the roadmap. It's literally the whole path to go from I want to do an ADU to I have an ADU, and we cover the roadmap covers every aspect, the financial side of it, the ROI, rents. We have several different options of what can be built, the different costs, and of course landscape. But that's what makes our product so unique, is we take a 360 holistic look at the project and present to you 3 different options. We, as a Homeplex advisor, I am your advocate. I work for the client. I don't go in there and just say, hey, you need to buy our product. Because if you go to a contractor or even a prefab manufacturer, they're going to sell their product to you, and they aren't going to look at, well, why is this the best thing for you? What we do with the roadmap is we look at what are all the options and then present to you what are the best options for you. And that way you're informed and you can make the decision. And then once you make the decision, we then help you, see it through to fruition. That's what we do. And that's what I think makes Homeplex unique from any other company out there, is we're here for you, for the client, the homeowner. And we try to make the process as simple and seamless as possible for them.
I believe that 100%, which is why we are both advisors.
Yeah, that's why you're an advisor.
Yes, that's right. And we do, by the way, shameless plug here, we're going to promote our monthly calls that we have. So every month, Michael and the team, we all have webinars where we share a referral agent / ADU advisor opportunity for a lot of the realtors who are listening to this, or real estate professionals. We have calls every month, or webinars, I should say, where we go over some of these options where you can send your clients to us. We'll take care of them, take care of you, and make sure that everybody wins throughout the process. So with that, I think, how can people connect with you? Maybe we'll leave it at that, and we'll eventually have a part 2, I think, at some point, because we're going to be doing a lot of ADUs with landscape, and I think it'd be cool to have some case studies next time and show them to the people. But if they wanted to consult with you on the ADU project, or maybe you guys are you already built your ADU and now you're like listening to this podcast and you're like, you know what? I didn't think about landscape. He's right. And now you want to have a conversation. How can they connect with you or reach out to you?
Well, I'm sure you'll probably have a link somewhere on the post, but yes. My email address is michael.bernier@homeplex.net. So it's my name, which you see right there. Michael.bernier@homeplex, which is up there, .net, not com, .net.
.net.
Michael.
And your Instagram is?
And my Instagram is michael.bernier.design. Yeah, that's it. I
And
don't
I
look at
know
it.
that you've also done a lot of cool stuff on your YouTube. What's your YouTube?
Oh yeah, I'm relaunching my YouTube. I've had it for a while, but I just haven't posted anything. But I'm committed to. In fact, this video is going to be on there eventually. What is my? Well, it's I call it Think Outside. I have a like my educational side of my business. I actually have an online course and consulting business where I train professionals and anybody who wants to learn about landscape design, and that's called Think Outside, and that's thinkoutside.design. But I think that website is down at the moment because we're doing some work to it. But my YouTube channel, gosh,
I'll
I
put
wish
it in the
I
link,
should know
or
that,
I'll
but
put it in the,
yeah,
yeah.
it's Think Outside and or Michael Bernier Design, one of the two. You'll find me.
Yeah,
Uh,
you'll find it, and I'll make sure to share your info. And Michael and I are going to be collaborating, so I'm sure you guys will see him on my Instagram, on the Homeplex Instagram, and at the next event that we're having, we're going to be doing a lot of interviews for people who have built an ADU. So we're just going to continue to advocate on ADUs and landscape, and we'll keep bringing you guys strategies, hacks that work and that can help you increase your ROI, just help you attract better way of living, better tenants, or just better quality of life, if it's for personal use. But with that, I really want to thank you, Michael, for your time. And everybody else who's listening, please feel free to share feedback or any questions that you have. Reach out to Michael. And we'll
yeah,
leave it at that.
my pleasure. This has been fun. Well, you
Yes.
and I have so many things planned. Where people are going to get tired of seeing us. We're going to
Yeah, they are.
be.
All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. We'll see you on the next one.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Steph.